Please comment where you are watching in the world. Please share your horror stories via our email or subreddit in the description. Thank you. Over a year ago, I lived through one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. Not because of what I saw, but because of what someone else had done. It all started when I was forced to move out of my apartment due to a mold infestation that had gotten completely out of control. The mold wasn't just an inconvenience, it was making people sick. You could feel it in your throat when you breathed, like the air itself was contaminated. The management, of course, did the absolute bare minimum to address it, just enough to check the legal boxes, but it was nowhere near enough to make the place livable. So like many of my neighbors, I had no choice but to leave. The move was an absolute nightmare. Mold spores had embedded themselves into nearly everything I owned, and cleaning or tossing my belongings became a grueling, heartbreaking process. Anything porous, couches, mattresses, rugs, was a lost cause. Even things I thought I could save, like books or clothes, had to be carefully scrubbed or thrown out after hours of agonizing over whether they'd ever be truly safe to keep. It was overwhelming. The sheer amount of effort it took to sort through my life, piece by piece, deciding what was salvageable and what had to go, left me feeling hollow. Most of my belongings didn't make the cut. I lost almost everything. Thankfully, my sister-in-law, let's call her Sarah, offered to help. I was grateful for the company, especially since the whole ordeal felt so isolating and sad. Sarah's the kind of person who brings a calming presence to tense situations, so having her there made things a little more bearable, at least at first. We started late one evening, sorting through boxes and furniture, working our way through the mold-tainted wreckage of my life. The apartment was dimly lit because most of the lamps had already been packed or tossed. The air felt heavy, not just with moisture from the mold, but with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Still, I chalked it up to exhaustion and the stress of the situation. Sarah, on the other hand, started acting a little off. I noticed her frowning as she moved through the rooms, her expression shifting from focused to uneasy. At one point, while we were sorting through a box in my bedroom, she suddenly stopped, rubbed her arms like she was cold, and said, "I don't know what it is, but this place feels wrong." "Yeah, well, toxic mold will do that to you," I joked. I didn't think much of it at the time. The apartment did feel gross, but I figured it was just the combination of the smell, the dampness, and the stress of losing so much. Sarah nodded, but her discomfort didn't go away. In fact, as the night wore on, it seemed to get worse. Every now and then, she'd glance over her shoulder like she'd heard something, or she'd pause mid-sentence and stare down the hallway. When I asked her what was wrong, she'd just shake her head and say, "Nothing. Probably just my imagination." Eventually, she suggested we move out to the porch to finish going through the remaining boxes. It was brighter out there, and honestly, I was glad for the fresh air. We worked quietly for a while, but every so often, Sarah would go back inside to grab a tool or another box. The third or fourth time she came back out, she looked pale. Her hands were shaking slightly as she set the box down. "I think I saw something," she said, her voice unsteady. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Like a mouse?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "Something. I don't know. A shadow. It moved." My first instinct was to brush it off. It was late, we were tired, and the dim lighting inside could easily play tricks on your eyes. But Sarah looked genuinely shaken. She tried to laugh it off, saying she was probably just imagining things, but I could tell she didn't believe that herself. I didn't want to make her feel worse, so I suggested we wrap up for the night. We'd already done a lot of work, and there wasn't much left to sort through anyway. As we were loading the last of the boxes into the car, Sarah froze. I'll never forget the way her face changed. One moment, she was fine, and the next, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and whispered, "Look in the window. You don't see that." I turned to look, my heart starting to race. But when I stared into the darkened window of my apartment, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just the faint reflection of the streetlights and the outline of the empty room beyond. "I don't see anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her grip on my arm tightened. "How do you not see that? It's right there." Her voice was trembling now, and when I looked at her, I saw tears in her eyes. Sarah isn't the kind of person who scares easily. She's always been level-headed, practical, the type to laugh off ghost stories. But in that moment, she looked absolutely terrified. She said it was a shadow figure, clear as day, standing in the window and watching us. She couldn't see its eyes, but she said she could feel it staring, like it was aware of us, watching. I didn't know what to say. I didn't see anything, I didn't feel anything, but her fear was so real, so visceral, that I couldn't help but feel spooked myself. We climbed into the car as quickly as we could, and as we drove away, Sarah kept glancing back at the apartment. She said the shadow figure was still there, tracking us with its face as we passed by. I didn't look. I didn't want to. The car ride was silent, except for the sound of our breathing. Sarah was still trembling, clutching her hands tightly in her lap, and I could feel the tension radiating off her. I asked if she was okay, and all she said was, "I've never seen anything like that before." She pulled out her phone and started reciting prayers, Saint Michael, among others. And though I wasn't particularly religious, I found myself joining in just to feel like we were doing something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment Sarah grabbed my arm, the look on her face, the tears in her eyes. I'd had my own strange, possibly paranormal experiences before, but this was different. This wasn't something I'd seen or felt myself. It was something I'd witnessed through someone else's fear. And somehow, that made it even scarier. What had she seen? Why couldn't I see it? And why did it feel like, even now, the memory of that shadow was still lingering, just out of sight? I don't know if it was the mold, the stress, or something else entirely that made Sarah see what she saw that night. That night, as much as I tried to shake it off, I couldn't help but feel like we hadn't left that shadow figure behind. Like maybe somehow it had followed us. I know this sounds fantastical and wild, and I agree. This is in fairly remote backcountry West Virginia, which is known for being old and haunted. It was experienced entirely by 2 of us, but the worst parts by all 4. This led to all 4 of us at some point battling personal issues in our lives that I believe stemmed directly from this encounter. The following is, at least to my memory, and what I've been able to corroborate with the other people that were there, 100% accurate and true. When I was 17, 2004, we had a bad experience camping near haunted train tunnels and sites of sudden tragic death. History of immediate, 1 square mile, area, mother and son drowning in the creek nearby. Drug dealers killed in state police shootout at a nearby hunting cabin, and many years before, cheap laborers had been killed building this double set of train tunnels. They were actually buried in a long-forgotten little graveyard nearby the tunnels that has since been found and restored. We decided to go camping before graduation as a friend group of 4, just to do something one last time, before we all went our separate ways in life. This is private property on the backside of a big hill around which the creek flows in a huge, several-mile-long bend. Camp set up, fire going. Shortly after nightfall, my cousin and I sat on the creek bank, maybe 20 yards away from camp, spotlighting fish in the water. We began to hear a rhythmic slosh of what sounded like someone wading through the water, maybe halfway up their shin deep. So we shined the light around upstream. We then spotted the symmetrically and rhythmically consistent disturbance made by what looked and sounded like invisible feet/legs sloshing towards us. When we would turn our spotlight off, it would start. It would stop when illuminated. It was reacting to us, and this was the first ice bucket stomach clench moment. We knew this was not fish, and could not rationalize what was happening. This scared us pretty badly, but we decided best to keep it to ourselves and join the others gathered at the fire. As we made our way back, we heard the sloshing make it to where we were on the bank, and the noise stopped. Given the speed we witnessed it moving, and how far it was from us when we were watching it, it must have sped up to make it to the bank we were on in the amount of time it took us to get back to camp. Others at the camp heard it as well, and figured we had either gotten in, or somehow riled up some fish, but we just played it off. It sounded and looked like an invisible person wading towards us through the water. After the noise ended at the creek bank, we all saw the tall grass disturbed as something we couldn't see ran around the foliaged perimeter of our circularly cleared campsite. This could have been an animal, but it was fast. We then began to hear what sounded like a man talking to us, as in speaking into the ear of each person, the left ear if that matters. At first it sounded garbled, but after maybe 15 to 20 seconds we could make out the words saying, "We shouldn't be there, and we needed to leave," before finally addressing us directly and saying slightly more forcefully, "You need to leave." Obviously this was terrifying, and at first we thought there was a person or group of people out there walking up on our camp, and that is dangerous. We were all frozen with fear, but then adrenaline hit. As we freaked out and started to run to our ATV, all 4 of us saw a tall black shadow man wearing what looked like a hat, relaxing against the front of our ATV. It straightened up when we saw it, and it saw us, and it just sort of hung there staring at us for a few seconds. No feet, The legs ended in sort of wavy lines like looking above the fire at the heat waves. It stood out against the dark night behind it. The girl screamed, which broke our fear freeze, and it zipped like the flashback towards the train tunnels people had died in. Interestingly, when we went to start the ATV, it turned over sluggishly, as if the battery had been slightly drained, despite working fine not long before when we rode it down. This entire event happened over the course of maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and within an hour of the sun going down. After putting our story out there, I received a lot of feedback from people who have also had bad encounters in this area over many years. Even a guy I worked with, who I didn't know knew this area, told me that my uncle had hired him to trap in that area, and it was the only place he didn't check traps alone at night. He said it was almost like the animals leave that place at night. No less than a month later, my uncle, who owns the property, was up on the hill raccoon hunting at night with a dog. At some point the dog was on a rock face up above him and knocked a large rock loose that fell and struck my uncle in the side of the neck. This understandably messed him up pretty bad and paralyzed almost his entire body, but he still had limited functionality on his left side. We could never figure out how he got himself back to his ATV and turned it around and drove himself out of there. It wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years later, around Halloween, when my story makes it rounds on the local Facebook groups, that my uncle texted my mother out of the blue. You have no reason to believe my uncle's character reference, but he is a salt of the earth, hunting, farming, working man, even working past his retirement as a millionaire. Honest, funny, just an incredibly stand-up guy. He is easygoing but also no nonsense. In his text to my mother he said, "I've never told anybody this before, and I probably won't again. The man in the hat the kids saw at the creek that night helped pick me up off the ground and put me back on my ATV and get me turned around. Until I heard that, I had always assumed that the shadow man was the one who was trying to scare us out of there, but thinking back on it, maybe he was the one whispering to us, telling us we need to leave and possibly avoid something scarier and more dangerous, although I have no idea what could have been scarier than that." I can't put this on my other socials. I don't want to freak out my friend who this happened to. I have no one to talk to about this who is as open as me. A few months ago, I had a bizarre dream that a friend's husband disappeared. I woke up knowing it was not a dream. Dread/fear/confusion. Confusion because I don't know this man. Our daughters are best friends, and we carpool, but I've only interacted with the wife and not her husband, except for a couple meetings. "Hi there, good to see ya." He is not in my sphere. I dream of PPL in my circle, i.e. my mom just passed away. She was on hospice, and I've been dreaming of her death for many weeks. Fast forward to today. I asked my daughter if her friend was back from vacation, yet BC, they had missed a week of school following winter break. She said no, and she heard from another kid something bad happened to their dad. I froze. I remembered my dream that I had tried to brush off as only a dream. I remembered waking with dread and fear and emptiness. Immediately I texted the wife, "Hi, just checking in to see how your vacation was. Everything okay?" "No, Mike died on our last day of vacation." Devastated. I'm so broken-hearted for this family. Of course. I'm also freaked out, and I need some people in the premonition community to share your thoughts or similar occurrences. This is not the first time I've dreamed a real event, or a voice has told me ahead of an event. It's just the first time it's been a death. He was not ill and was in his 40s. This was not something we expected. Similar experience to a friend of mine. The very first experience I had involving anything with the paranormal, mediumship, etc., whatever you want to label it as, was sensing the death of a loved one. I sensed this several hours in advance before the person actually died from a head-on motorcycle collision with a semi-truck. Killed on impact. I was in 8th grade and in a different state at the time. When I experienced this, I had touched an object, and it was through unintentional psychometry that gave me this information. I had no idea what to do at the time. I felt like I should have went down to the principal's office and called my grandparents, because it was their best friends, John and Jillian, a husband and wife, I was sensing this for, but I didn't. Later that evening, my mom and stepdad came to pick me up from drama club, and she tells me that the husband had died from being in an accident that afternoon. A year later, I sensed the passing of the wife. I didn't tell anyone for many years, and it bothered me so much. This is called a death sense. This has happened to me at least 4 or 5 times in my life. Some of them have been with pets too. It's a feeling I get when I'm suddenly overwhelmed with the feeling of needing to say goodbye to that loved one in a way that doesn't alarm them, and to make it count, because the feeling tells me I'm never going to see them again in the physical world. I believe that feeling is the way of the spirit world warning us that a loved one is about to transition. I think the reason why many people don't always pick up on that frequency of energy is because they're so consumed with emotions such as anxiety, fear, dread, hope for recovery, sadness. Those emotions are very powerful and can easily block a person off from referring energetic messages, impressions, feelings that could bring them reassurance, warning, etc. That's not even including freak accidents. I just think it goes back to subconsciously tapping into that frequency of energetic information. It can be very daunting and confusing when you experience it. It definitely challenges your morals and whether or not you should tell that person about it. It's a tricky situation. I believe there are appropriate times when it's okay, and other times where it's absolutely uncalled for. Discernment is key. Just remember, if you tell someone that you're sensing a loved one's death, or even their death, be prepared for them to become hysterical and even angry at you. I will share a couple of experiences, mine and some people I know. Though it's not as intense as grandfather's encounters, it isn't very normal either. I'm from West Bengal, India. I live in a town near Kolkata, although the incident took place in my grandparents' village. This incident occurred in 2021, when I went to their place during vacations. There is a local folklore about the man-eating demons called Pishak ghouls in our village. It is said that they live in graveyards and eat the flesh of dead humans who didn't live a righteous life. But sometimes they take form of a beautiful woman or a crying child to attract people at night and eat them alive. It's a pretty well-known story. We have been hearing it since childhood, though I personally didn't believe it. Jinns exist, but they can't hurt humans in normal circumstances. One day I went to see a performance in a neighboring village with my friend Armin. That be why the time the performance ended it was almost midnight. We started coming back home. On the way back, we had to cross an old graveyard. It was one of the biggest paranormal hotspots in our village. We were talking about the performance the whole time until we reached the graveyard. Both of us became silent. We have crossed this road many times, but never this late at night. Our body felt heavy as we crossed it. Every noise felt paranormal. Each step felt slower than the last. Suddenly we heard a faint noise. As we walked down the road, the sound became louder and clearer. It was the cry of a child. Of course, we just had to run into a ghoul. I felt like crying. I looked beside me. Armin was just as scared. The most terrifying thing is the fact that we heard it means it already knows about our presence. As we slowly went closer to the sound, we saw a child about 1 to 2 years old crying beside the road. We did not approach it. We didn't even directly look at it. As we walked by it, my eyes started tearing up. Each and every cell in my body told me to run. I barely managed to keep my sanity. I would have probably passed out if I was alone. As we went past it, the crying became louder and louder, to the point I felt like my eardrum would burst. Once we were about 20 meters away from it, the crying stopped. I could not longer control my body. I ended up looking back, and I saw nothing. It was gone. There wasn't any sign of it around. I took a deep breath. My heart felt lighter. Armin looked at me. He was also relieved. But before we could say a single sentence, we heard a demonic scream. It came from the graveyard. That was the last straw. We ran as fast as we could. I could feel my consciousness slipping away. We did not stop running until we reached our village. There were few people sitting beside a campfire playing cards. The moment we saw them, I became unconscious. I wake up in my grandparents' home. Armin had already woken up. He told them everything. I confirm Ed's claims. We saw a Pishak. We really did. Some believed us and some didn't. I got an earful from my grandmother. Well, it's been 4 years since that incident. We still talk about it when I go back to the village during vacations. I still wonder what would have happened if I had been alone at that time. Maybe I wouldn't be here telling you guys this incident. But one thing is for sure. I'm never using that road at night ever again. My friend's story next. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, shows up near my ceiling and watches me at night. I'm not afraid of her. Of course, my first thought upon seeing her was that maybe I was losing my mind. But one night my wife came back to the bed from the bathroom and saw the little girl and flipped out. The little girl quickly disappeared. My wife isn't the only one that has seen her. Once I was driving in a new neighborhood with a guy, looking at houses being built, and the little girl stuck her head around the corner of the house. The guy with me immediately said, "WTF is that child doing on a job site?" We walked over to find her, and when we got to the backyard, we saw a large group of deer, about 10. I didn't tell the guy that I'd seen the girl before. We were both stunned by the deer as this was in the city. We just walked back to the truck without mentioning the girl again. I think she somehow increases my intuition. A couple of months ago I was walking downtown and decided to go into a certain building. Inside were people talking about addiction and giving out Narcan. I got 3 nasal spray Narcans from a lady, tossed them in my truck, and forgot about them. Then one night the girl was flying around my ceiling frantically. It was clear she wanted me to follow her, so I did. I found my roommate collapsed and unresponsive on the couch. The little girl motioned for the door, and I remembered the Narcan spray. I gave one to my roommate, and it saved his life. He had overdosed. This little girl has dark hair and wears a black dress with paisley decorations on it. The first time I saw her, I asked her, "Who are you? Why are you here?" And she said nothing. She smiled and floated around in a circular motion. I don't tell people about this little girl. People don't understand, and it makes me sound crazy. I posted about her on another thread, and thought I would do a post just about her. And finally, from my other friend. My dad passed away about a year and a half ago. My son was only 15 months old at the time, but he saw his pop pretty regularly. Every so often, more often than not, my son will bring up my dad in bizarre ways. When I tell him I love him, he'll say, "And my pop loves me." Or if he does something good, I'll say me and dad are so happy, and he'll be like, "And my pop is happy too." Both of his grandmoms are still alive and around, but he'll never mention them in this same manner. He never talks to my dad directly that I've noticed, but I'm curious if anyone has any insight on what this could mean. Does he see my dad? Or does he simply remember him and curious where he's been? There's a little girl in a black and white paisley dress that hovers above my bed sometimes. The little girl at night. She's 5 years old or so. She has dark hair and wears a black dress with white paisley decorations on it. I first started seeing her about 5 years ago. She just floats above the bed near the ceiling and watches me. My ex-wife saw her one night when she came back to bed from the bathroom, and the wife flipped out. She was terrified by the little girl, and the girl quickly disappeared. The girl basically floats above the bed facing me. Her dress and hair hang down just as you'd expect. I've never been the least bit afraid of her. The first time I saw her, I talked to her. "Who are you? Why are you here?" And she just smiled and floated in a circular pattern. I haven't said anything to her since. I don't have an opinion on who or what the little girl is. I will say that since she started coming around, my intuition is amazing. A couple of months ago, I was walking downtown and felt like I should go into a certain building. Inside were people talking about addiction and handing out Narcan. A woman handed me 3 nasal spray Narcans, and I tossed them in my truck and forgot about them. Then one night my little girl was flying around the ceiling frantically, and it was clear that she wanted to follow her. I followed her to the living room where my roommate had collapsed and was unresponsive on the couch. She motioned out the door, and I remembered the Narcan. I got one and gave it to my roommate. It saved his life. Turns out he'd overdosed. On the topic of kids, here is a story of a creepy doll I have heard. I'm aware of how ridiculous it sounds, but I swear to God this is what I experienced, and keep in mind this is coming from the perspective of 8 to 10-year-olds. In elementary school, this girl, Amy, bought a pony toy from the book fair. My friends, Sadie, Alice, and I always harassed her about it, asking if we could have it, but of course she always refused. Gave it a few months, and we all kinda admitted defeat and forgot about the toy. Out of nowhere, Amy gave the toy away to Sadie with no explanation. But after a few days, Sadie told Alice and I the toy was possessed. Sadie said the toy would turn and look at her. One night she had lined all her pony toys up on her dresser, opposite the door, facing the wall. She left her room, and as soon as she got through the doorway, she realized she forgot something, turned around, and they were all facing her. Me and Alice kinda silently agreed Sadie was lying, but played along with it, asking her questions about it. I asked if I could have it for a night to see for myself, and Sadie agreed. She brings it to school, and I bring it home. When I got home, I told my brother about it. We joked about it being possessed when I set it on a table, and it fell over. He was the only other person in the house aware of the toy. I set up my own experiment in the bathroom. I grabbed some pony toys of my own, and set them all up on a shelf. One facing behind the door, one facing the shower, one facing the sink, and the pony facing the wall behind the shelf. I posted up watching from the toilet. I sat there maybe 5 to 15 minutes, and nothing happened. I decided it was fake, decided to use the bathroom, and go on with my night. As soon as I walked through the doorway, I realized I forgot to wash my hands. When I turned back around, all of them were facing me, except for one that was particularly hard to stand up. It had fallen over without making a sound, and all in a matter of seconds. Keep in mind, I was the only person in the bathroom. I just used it. And even if somehow someone was in the bathroom, this all happened in a matter of seconds. They all would have had to move at once. I cried, ran to my mom, and explained what happened. She's a superstitious woman. She was pissed. I brought something like that in the home without telling her. She put it in a Tupperware with salt and threw it away. I went back to school and told Sadie what happened. I asked if she has any idea why it's possessed. She said shortly before Amy gave it away, they had a sleepover and they wanted to summon demons. She said, quote, they put books together and said an ancient chant they found on the internet. She didn't elaborate further what that even means and didn't remember the chant or website. She believed whatever ritual they found and did made the toy possessed, or at least that was her only explanation. My mom grew up in a small town in Mexico where everyone pretty much knows each other. I believe the population was around 350 at the time, 80s. Around the time of the events, she was 10 years old. I don't know if it runs in the family, but at some time in our life, every single member of my family has experienced something paranormal. Well, here are some of my mom's stories that I think are worth telling. She lived in a small adobe house. It was a super small home for the 5 of them, my grandparents, my uncle, my aunt, and my mom. The kitchen was located on the front part of the house, and the rooms were on the back. There was a wall that divided the kitchen from the rest of the house. And to get to either, or there was a door inside the house, kind of how some hotel rooms have a door to get to the other room. Well, that was their house. They also had a window in one of the rooms so they could see to the kitchen. The kids would sleep in one room, and my grandparents in the other one. Where my mom and my aunt and uncle would sleep was the room with the window. My mom tells me that at night they would hear the chairs from the kitchen being dragged, and all the things on the table would get smacked off the table. In one occasion the noises were very loud. It woke her and her siblings up. They were curious. Although they knew what was making the noise, they looked through the window, and they saw a small shadow dragging a chair across the room. She said they ran to their parents' room and slept the night there. The noises went on all night, she recalls. They believed it was my great-great-grandma's dad that would mess around with them because he lived in that house before it was passed on to my grandma. Another time, she said she awoke during the night and she looked to the side of the bed where she saw a big black dog with red eyes. She went under the blanket and didn't come out until the AM. She always believed she saw the devil in the shape of a dog. She also saw what looked like a monkey hanging and swinging from the door of her room. Those are some few stories I remembered her telling me. Now some of my stories. It was Thanksgiving 2006. We had dinner with the family. I was 12 years old. I got mad at my mom because I wanted to go to the mall for Black Friday with her and my aunt, and she said no, so I left to my room. Me and my little sister shared a room. The room was small. We had a bunk bed, those metal bunk beds that make hella noise when you move and turn. While I was watching Chicken Little, it was probably 12 a.m. Once the movie finished, I turned off the light and tried to sleep. I was laying down facing the wall. I had my eyes closed trying to go to sleep when the bed started creaking, like somebody had laid down someone really heavy. I turned around and the empty side of the mattress was sink down like someone was laying down. I freaked out, but couldn't move. I tried to scream, and I couldn't. I was so scared I started to cry. I closed my eyes really tight, and I let the loudest scream out. My little sister and cousin came into the room and turned the light on. My sister hugged me, and then I told them what happened. When they turned the light on, you could see on the bed sheets, all messed up like someone was laying there. That was definitely one experience that stuck with me. Throughout my life, I've had experiences with the paranormal, usually just seeing shadows and hearing steps or someone trying to open the doors. Back in Mexico, we had my aunt and uncle. My mom's siblings stayed over at our home when they came to visit from here, US, to Mexico. I remembered one occasion my aunt told my sister that if she didn't behave, la mano peluda, the hairy hand, will come and get her. She freaked my sister out so much. At night we had 2 beds in one room. I shared bed with mom and my aunt, and sis shared a bed. At night my aunt was awoke by tapping. She said she woke up and heard tapping. Following was 3 knocks on our room's door. She believed that had happened to her because she was trying to scare my sister. So my girlfriend and her friends invited me to stay at a small cabin Airbnb in the Appalachian Mountains near Seven Devils. The idea was just to go up there to enjoy some snow tubing and then some light drinking, hot tub, and board games in the cabin afterwards. So the cabin was pretty high up in the mountain, and the drive up to it was kind of scary. Single car length road for the most part, no railings on the side of the road. So if you were on the side of the truck, which we'd rented a 4WD to make the drive up, thank goodness, it was a sheer drop on that side. Sure, if we drove off the road, we'd likely be stopped by some trees on the way down, but still a bit nerve-wracking. Another thing was some of the trees on the trail had faces on them for decoration. I think they were supposed to look cute, but they just looked kinda unnerving for most of us. I really should have taken pictures, but was too anxious during the climb. The cabin itself was almost at the top of the mountain and fairly small. A small living room with a very tiny and narrow kitchen and 2 bedrooms. Hot tub on the lower porch because the cabin itself was basically on the 2nd floor, so you had to go up a stairway to get into it. Key to the cabin was in a lockbox, so no special door lock option, just an old-fashioned cabin. We came back after snow tubing and dinner. The others drank enough to get buzzed whilst I only had a glass of wine, since I have a condition that makes it dangerous to get too much alcohol in my system, so relatively sober. Enjoyed the hot tub as planned, witnessed a beautiful shooting star, then played board games after that until around 1 a.m., and we all went to bed. I woke up a little after 4 a.m. because I was suddenly sweating, and then I felt kinda unsettled. Decided I needed to go to the bathroom, so I got up. I left the bedroom and nothing seemed amiss, so I used the bathroom. When I left the bathroom, the front door was wide open. Naturally, I felt immediately uneasy. But again, this was a small cabin, so there was nowhere for any intruder to hide. I could easily see the entire interior of the cabin from the tiny hallway. I decided maybe the last person through the door last night after the hot tub didn't fully close the door and lock it appropriately, because there is a sign by the door that says "Close door firmly," and it was fairly windy outside. I mean, that wind was howling out there. So I go over to the door and close it, making sure that it's firmly enough in the doorway to fully lock it. I even jiggle the handle a few times and try to see if it'll open when locked. It doesn't budge, so I start to head back to the room. Then I hear the door rattle a little bit, and I turn around and stare at it. I watch the lock itself turn, and then the door opens, and it doesn't slam open from the wind. It just slowly swung open. I stayed extremely still, because of course that was crazy. The door has a huge, clear window on it with no curtains, and a big window beside it that also doesn't have curtains, and there was absolutely no one on the other side of it. There's no way someone could have ducked out of view either, and hurried away from the door after pushing it open either, because they would have had to make a lot of noise hurrying down the steps to get off the walkway. Like I said, it was an old-fashioned door as well with a simple lock and knob, no electronic buttons or anything to unlock or lock by buttons or remotely. After getting the nerve to close the door again and locking it firmly, nothing else happened that night. I couldn't really go back to sleep because I was just too scared to do so. The following morning I told the others about it and they were pretty spooked too, but otherwise glad we were only staying that one night. Before we packed up the truck to leave, there was this strange knocking noise coming from the surrounding woods. Not like someone knocking on a wall or door. It was a deep, hollow-sounding knock that only knocked twice, stopped for a while, and then would do it again. Maybe it was just trees knocking together, but after what happened early in the morning like that, it was a little unsettling. So yeah, I'm from Florida, and though I've experienced other paranormal activity before, that was the most physical thing I've experienced before, and I've definitely heard plenty of stories about odd occurrences in the Appalachians. In a way, I'm glad I experienced something, but I'll never forget the fear I felt. After all, my first thought was an intruder or something, and it would have been pretty bad being up there so high by ourselves. If we'd had any reason to run, we could have easily fallen off a cliff or something in the pitch-black darkness outside. Several years ago, I was a local legend, for lack of a better term, in the bars where I lived. I bartender, DJ'd and bounced. I had taken a summer off, and a friend called me. The next town over was a historic building. In the basement of this building was a bar. Al Capone used to visit it during Prohibition. Legend is many people died there. This building was once a thriving bar and hotel but closed down. Not sure why. It is also known to be one of the most haunted places in the area. Anyone that ever visited there had stories. Here is mine. The friend that called me said her friend, we will call her Julie, was bartending at this place. They were trying to reopen it. They wanted me to DJ and pull double duty and bounce. I said sure and showed up a couple of hours before opening. I met Julie. She was waiting outside for me, refusing to be alone inside. We went in and she made me go to the restroom with her. My back was turned because she was too afraid to even do that alone. We waited in the office for the owner to show. We made small talk, but I kept looking over my shoulder. Julie noticed and said, "Yeah, they are watching us." I'm not exactly sure how long we were talking before I heard footsteps on the upper floor. Julie, who is a redhead, somehow turned paler. I wanted to go investigate, but she would not let me. Soon the noises grew, sounding like a chair or bed was being dragged across the floor. The owner showed up, and we went to the bar and set up. He joked about the ghosts and told me some tales about what he had seen and heard when he was alone there. The word was out about the bar, but since it was out of the way in a small town, not a lot of people showed up. We ended up closing around midnight. I helped clean up, and we all left together. As I was pulling out, I noticed a face in a window on the second floor. Not the most extreme of experiences, but it was strong. I could feel the fact that I was being watched. I never went back either. Another story to share. Hello, I apologize in advance for the potential typos that this text might contain. I'm currently writing this at 2:13 a.m. on a Sunday night. I choose to write this rather than contacting emergency services or my family, as I don't believe I'm in any acute danger and I don't want to worry anyone. But I'm still terrified and would be happy to hear if anyone has a probable reason for the events that have been happening. For context, I'm currently staying in a fairly rural area and I have a few neighboring houses near me. I'm currently staying at my parents' summer cottage of sorts, trying to study for my flight school finals. But I want to state with absolute confidence that I'm not aware of any neighbors staying here at this time, as it's still winter time and most people do not have the proper equipment to keep their cottages warm at this time. Everything started happening last Thursday, so only a couple of days ago. I don't recall the timings of these incidents as accurately as I would like to, as I've tried to limit my phone usage to completely focus on my studies. But according to the sun being quite low, I would assume it was around 5 to 6 p.m., which is when the sun starts to set. I was out to grab some dry wood from the storage to keep the fire burning for the night, and I heard a car driving on the dirt road down from the property. I was pleasantly surprised, as I hadn't had any company during my stay, so I started heading down to the road to see if it was anyone I knew. Before I could make my way down, though, I heard a car rev to its maximum, like he was on first gear, and kicked the gas pedal as hard as he could, and you could really hear the gravel flying on the road. It's super hard to explain. I hope I don't sound like a lunatic. Anyhow, I don't know why, but this being the only human contact I had had during the past week made me so uneasy. I was immediately contemplating on leaving and heading back home, as I had read enough about break-ins and such and thought he might have been scoping the place out. But I calmed myself down and shrugged it off. After all, I knew I couldn't get any studying done back home. Fast forward to Friday, and I had just settled down into my bed, which is located on a sort of loft in the main house. I was watching an episode of Family Guy, and I have a decently sized window which overlooks the front side of the property, and I can also sort of see to the parking area down the hill. I say sort of because there's a ton of trees and a storage building placed in front. Now I don't know what kind of error could have caused this, but there's a motion sensor placed on a tree, so you can potentially park a car there in the dark. I don't own a car and came with my motorcycle, which I locked into the storage, so it couldn't have been picking up my car or vehicle. Now the horrifying thing was that the motion sensor went on in the parking area. And when it did, it stayed on for about 30 seconds before it went off, and then almost immediately back on. It did this for, not even kidding, 15 minutes or so straight, until it went dark. Now if this was a horror movie, I would have gone and checked that, but I was literally sitting on the edge of my bed with poop in my pants. I started Googling what could have caused it, and I came to the realization that it was probably an animal. Maybe there's a bird nest located there. Nothing out of the ordinary happened on Saturday, but the last straw happened just around a couple hours ago, which I cannot put my finger on. It could be that the isolation is making me crazy, or the fact that it was an animal, but something about it still gives me shivers. I was going to take a piss. We don't have a built-in bathroom, so I just do it near the woods. I was in the middle of my business when I heard footsteps, like literal footsteps. They must have been an animal's though, but what kind I have no idea. Now I'm going to try to explain this the best I can before I'm going to try and call my parents again. Hell, I don't even know if I can post this. The service has been so bad today. I've literally had times I haven't had service for multiple hours. I'm terrified and will be leaving when the sun rises, but I won't step out of the house until sunrise, that's for goddamn sure. Now try to understand this, please. I know I sound crazy, but the footsteps occurred in intervals, having about a few second pause in between, but it wasn't walking speed, it wasn't running speed. It was abnormally fast, like someone was stomping their feet on the ground as fast as they could, and then stopping, until doing it again. I ran inside and locked every single one of the doors, closed the blinds, and I'm currently typing this with a kitchen knife in hand. I created a Reddit account and Googled the best channel to gain some sort of comfort from a wiser person who can convince me that there isn't some psycho outside playing a sick joke on me. I repeat, I don't have any neighbors staying near me, nor have any cars drove past our road today. I'm still hearing sounds outside, but it could be my mind playing tricks on me, and they are not as distinct as the stepping sound. I live with my husband, my father-in-law, and 3 dogs. English is also not my first language, so bear with me please, aha. I was home alone with the dogs. One is my service dog, gigantically oversized German Shepherd, scared of nothing. So he stays with me most of the day in my bedroom, whereas the 2 girls, both big/medium dogs, German Shepherd and Golden Retriever, have their own room. Both rooms have doggy doors leading to the outside. Around midday I hear the front doors open. Our house is extremely old and hasn't been updated since building, so the front door is incredibly loud, creaks and slams. It also has a metal door in front of it which squeaks and slams with a vibration like noise. Basically, it is a very loud, specific noise. My dog, who is sleeping, laying on his back in a deep sleep, shoots awake and rolls over, his ears standing fully up and looking at me with the most terrified look I'd ever seen on his face. His eyes looked like they were bulging out of his head. As the footsteps started around the house, he was tilting his head trying to figure out the noise and whimpered like he was scared and confused. The noises got further from my room and closer to the back door, so my boy ran out. A few seconds after the door opened and the footsteps started, the girls ran out of their room into the yard, which is what they do when someone comes home. Once everyone was outside together, after about 4 minutes of footsteps, the 3 dogs all went to look at the back door, but all eventually went back inside since no one was there to greet them. The footsteps continued around the house for another 15 or so minutes until they randomly stopped. No door opening or closing to let someone out. When this was all happening, I did not think it was paranormal at all. I thought it was my father-in-law, and that my dog was just being dramatic, and I giggled at his facial expression. My husband came home an hour later, which is when he pointed out there was a big puddle of pee, albeit a decent amount had soaked into the wood by now. Where my boy was laying on the floor, my dog is not old, has not peed himself since he was 5 months old, as a service dog has to be strictly potty trained and has access to the outside through his doggy door at all times. He had peed himself out of fear. I told him what happened since it explained the pee puddle, and he called his father. His father had not been home. He was in fact hours away. We frantically searched the house thinking that someone had broken in, but nothing was gone or even moved at all. My father-in-law and husband both think it was my deceased mother-in-law who had died in the house 16 years prior. My husband and I had an extremely bad fight the whole day before, so they think it is somewhat correlated. Although I definitely believe in the supernatural, I am also a scientist, and trying to think of anything else this could be, but it doesn't make sense, and I am very scared to be home alone. So there are 3 different stories I want to share about things that have happened in my house. It's probably worth noting that at least one person has in fact died in this house. My wife and I purchased this house 5 years ago after her aunt, previous owner, passed away in the living room area. Additionally, our aunt's dog was put down the same day she died. It was in her will. The dog was 17 years old, blind, deaf, and couldn't stand on his own without someone holding him. So he needed major help just eating and going potty outside. He also had a moderate case of cancer. I feel like I need to mention these things because I think there's a lingering spirit in the house. Story 1. A few months after moving in, my father-in-law came to visit and stay the night in the guest bedroom. This room contains our internet modem/router, which emits a very bright blinking set of lights. Around 4 p.m., my FIL asked if we could put some electrical tape over the blinking lights so it'd be easier for him to sleep later, so we did. We all then left the house and went out for dinner. Back at home around 8 p.m., we noticed the modem/router no longer had electrical tape covering the lights. Weird. We all asked each other if anyone removed the tape. Nope. I inspected the router all over, near the floor and everything. No sign of any tape. My FIL decided he'd just turn the router around and place his duffel bag in front of it to block the lights. The following morning we are eating breakfast. I go into the spare bedroom because our internet stopped working and thought I needed to reboot the router or see if my FIL accidentally unplugged something. It was then that I discovered the electrical tape was once again covering the lights. It wasn't wrinkled, nor did it show signs of dust from possibly falling off. I asked my FIL if he reapplied tape, and he said no. In fact, he doesn't know where we keep the electrical tape, so he couldn't even if he wanted to. All three of us vividly remember the electrical tape being completely absent before going to bed. The light emitted from the router is hard to mistake. It's obnoxiously bright, and if tape were on it the night before, it would have been obvious. So yeah, somehow the tape was completely removed, then reapplied, and nobody claims they did it. Story 2. This happened last year. My wife was tired and wanted to take a nap around 5 p.m. So I'm in the living room watching Netflix, and after about 20 minutes, I hear a faint crying sound coming from our bedroom. I quietly make my way over and lean towards the bedroom door. It distinctly sounded like my wife was crying, but trying to keep it quiet. I go to open the door and comfort her, however, the door is locked. I sent her a text message telling her I'm here if she needs anything. No response, so I figured she wanted to be left alone. I go back to watching Netflix. 45 minutes pass, and I can still hear the crying, so I go back again to check on her and attempt to open the door. This time the door is unlocked. The very moment that I touched the door handle, the crying stopped immediately, so I'm thinking to myself, what on earth is she keeping from me? As I enter the room, prepared to comfort her for anything. However, as I entered the room, I noticed she was completely asleep. She had a bit of drool going on, and her breathing pattern indicated that she was in fact asleep. There's no way she could fake being asleep that good, and so abruptly too. I gently woke her up and asked if everything was okay, and she seemed really confused. She had to reassure me several times that, A, I'm fine really, and B, I have no idea what you're talking about. She wears her heart on her sleeve, so I know there's no way she could keep something like that from me. She's a terrible actor, haha. I am genuinely convinced that someone or something was crying in that room, but I'm simultaneously convinced it wasn't my wife. Story 3. This is a short one, and it happened on Valentine's Day this year. We were getting ready to leave, and we're doing some last-minute tidying up. We typically try to clear the floors of all objects so we can turn on our Roomba before we leave. We've had our Roomba for 6+ years, and it has never once malfunctioned or done anything weird. My wife was across the house, and she yells to me about ready, and I respond, yeah, just gotta turn on the Roomba, then I'm coming. No sooner did those words leave my mouth, our Roomba turned on all by itself. I wasn't even in the same room. It makes a distinct ding sound when it turns on, so there was no mistaking it. I go check the Roomba's charging station, and sure enough, the Roomba is already on and doing its thing. Our Roomba is a mid-range model. It doesn't have cameras or a microphone, so there's no way I could have done some kind of voice-activated thing. It was just so bizarre. The one and only time it has ever turned on by itself is when I loudly verbalized I wanted to turn it on. So my ex and I moved into a new subdivision over a dozen years ago. We all moved in at approximately the same time, so we were all new neighbors all at once, which is sort of unusual. We were at the end of the cul-de-sac with a huge plot of woods next to us. I immediately noticed some strange things going on. The first was that in the middle of the night, I would wake up but not be able to move, and a blue orb would float into the room and either go into me or my husband. The only way I could describe it is it was altering our mood. It was making whoever was their recipient of the orb become very depressed and agitated. We would take turns being depressed and agitated over the course of the next 12 years, and I thought I was just dreaming. But I saw the patterns and it was unsettling. But who would believe me? Neighbors were starting to have issues with natural springs popping up in the crawl spaces. Everybody was having issues with strange things going on in their crawl space. One by one, all the neighbors started having issues. They'd move without saying a word or get divorced, or they'd be fighting in the driveway for everyone to hear. One family had a fire, but it seems like everybody was having major drama, one by one. I can't explain it, but the energy around all of it was just pure anger, and it didn't feel inherent to my neighbors. It felt like some weird outside pressure. We had constant parties and get-togethers, and we're all very close at first, but it started falling apart. Then in 2019 I had a major unknown illness with a 103.6 degrees fever. I've never had that high of a fever. I didn't move at all for 3 days, but on the third day, it was like I was never sick. When I woke up, I wanted to change my whole life. I wasn't happy in my marriage, and I knew I had to save myself, and I had to remove myself from the situation, because my husband at the time was being awful to me, and in the 20+ years we had been together, He had just been getting so much worse. He had always been OCD, but it now feels like he went off the deep end. Hoarding, spending like I've never seen before in depression, but he was angry and taking it out on me. Up to this point, all of this just felt like a coincidence or my imagination going crazy. Then I talked to a psychic, someone who I happened to know from my childhood, and she said that the house not only was it haunted, but it had a couple portals and entities were coming into the house because of the negative energy, and they were feeding off of it and making it expand. And somehow my positive energy was keeping some of it at bay, but after I moved out, it's like the negative energy exploded and it was out of control. They were attracted to the area and my ex-husband's bad energy. She said that the land was cursed or something bad happened there. She thinks it was either an animal slaughterhouse or people died there. That's what she told me. Make of it what you will. I was at the beginning of the divorce process and my ex was on vacation, so I got back into the house to get things. The energy in there was awful. Maybe it was my emotions, but all I could do was cry and scream, and I could feel them trying to grab onto me emotionally. So I opened all the windows and blasted happy music, and I cleaned that place top to bottom. But I ended up not taking a lot of my possessions because everything felt like it had been pulled into the mud. I can't explain it better than that. And my psychic friend corroborated this and said yes, she could feel it, and even if she tried to cleanse it, it would just keep coming back. She was happy that I was getting out of there, and she told me to never go back. Something else to mention, in the almost 2 years that I've been away from the house and have been living alone, I can feel this purge of energy, and it has been overwhelming. It could be the PTSD from being with an abusive partner, but I just feel like I am more exhausted than I've ever been, and the relief of finally feeling safe has been all-consuming. If you've ever been in fight or flight for a long time, and that has gone away, you understand what I'm saying. Once you aren't in survival mode anymore, it's like a tsunami of emotions come out. So we're at the point of the divorce where we're arguing about the house and who is going to get the house. I woke up this morning after having dreams all night telling me to let the house go because it's evil and the negativity and entities tied to this are completely out of control now. My dreams also told me that the neighbors who I love so dearly have been pulled into it, and to let them go as well. The emotions surrounding this have been completely overwhelming. This is absolutely my dream house, so I was conflicted about letting it go, but now I feel strongly that I need to walk away. Again, all of this could be a coincidence, but this was just off the chart strange from start to finish. And that same psychic friend has cleared thousands of houses, and she said that's the worst she's ever seen, especially because once she cleared it, they came back immediately. This happened to me 15 years ago when I was 17. I've never managed to find any sort of explanation behind it. I live in Scotland. I went for a run around a loop, which went from my village, around a tarmac road, around 4 miles, then back into the village. It passed through farms, woods, and a few remote houses on the route. It was mid-December, around 5 p.m., so it wasn't daylight, however wasn't dark. I was about 2.5 miles into the run with headphones in. As I was running, there was a long old farm building to my right, a field behind a hedge on the left, then woods either side of the road about 200 m beyond this. I saw a man walking towards me. He had his head down, a beanie hat on, a dull-looking jacket. He had a particular build, similar to one of my friends, Ross. He was just under 6 foot, broad shoulders, not fat, but built. As I got closer, he moved into the shadow of the farm building to my right, so I pulled my headphones out as it was strange. I slowed to a walk as I was around 10 meters away, and found he was gone. The wall was sandstone, but there was an old doorway which was previously bricked up. There weren't any other doors. Once I thought I had seen a ghost, I had the option to run back to a house, who I knew the person that lived there, or run through the road with woods either side. I quickly decided I couldn't go to someone's house, as I'd look weird, so ran home via the woods. I told my mother about this when I got home. She said I must have hallucinated, etc., and didn't believe me. The next day she was at work and told her workmates the story. At the end of the story, one of her co-workers pulled her aside to ask what the person looked like. She told him he was built like Ross XX, who was well known. She went white, and explained her husband's father had been cremated that day, and used to walk from the waterworks, along that road to his house each night after work. I saw in the newspaper a couple days later a statement saying Jimmy had been cremated that day. I've been back many times since, and never seen anything similar. To add another story, myself and a family member were going to visit the cemetery. It's a very old one, smallish one in the countryside, as at the cemetery for the small villages around that area. Although it's old, it's attached to a church that's not really used but kept up, and the cemetery which wraps around it is still currently being used, and people still being buried there. Hence why we were going that day to visit a grave. As we approached up the gravel path towards the cemetery, I could see over the wall a man probably in his late 20s or early 30s walking amongst the graves looking at them, in dark trousers or jeans and a jumper. Someone looking around isn't out of the norm. As we approached the entry gate, this man's head whipped up, and he looked at us with utter disgust, and what I can only say looked like pure rage twisted his face. He immediately started sprinting along the row of graves to get to the path leading to us. I was stuck in shock, just point at him going, "Oh, oh, oh," getting louder each word. My family member was almost as bad. She only saw him when he started running. She just keeps saying, a man," as his intent couldn't be mistaken. He got onto the path that led straight to us at the gate in seconds, and was running straight at us. I don't know why we didn't scream or run to the car, or just do anything but standing there practically waiting for him. We genuinely thought he was about to attack us or stab us, but that's what we did. I just stood in shock pointing. Then before he got the last 10 yards to the gate, he disappeared. 1 minute he's barreling down at us, and the next he's gone completely. Now our hearts were going mad, and honestly I can't tell you the relief when he disappeared. My first words were, "Oh, thank good it was a ghost," as that was genuinely the first coherent thought my brain had. I was bent over to get my breathing and pounding heart under control, hands shaking. My family member simply muttered, "A ghost," then burst into hysterical nervous laughter about how funny it was. We were both so relieved and truly happy it was a ghost. Instead of being scared we seen a ghost when most people would, but we were actually relived by it. As in that moment a ghost was far safer than this large man attacking us in the middle of nowhere with no one else around. He truly looked just like every normal person. There was no signs or telling he was a ghost, and even almost on top of us we couldn't tell at all until he disappeared. I've since been back a couple of times, but it's never happened again since. Hello, I'm here to share my experience from high school. Everything I'm telling you is my personal experience. I changed the names due to privacy reasons. I've always been intrigued by anything related to the paranormal. Before this experience, I have tried the Ouija board multiple times, and either nothing happened, or it could have been explained with my friend moving the planchette. But this time I will describe was different. We were hanging out in John's room with his younger cousin Ally and our mutual friend Carl. We all started to play the Ouija board and asked if anyone else is here. We waited for nothing to happen. Then John started to move it on purpose to mess with Ally, saying things like, "It's a ghost," and "They're talking to us," in a playful manner. John and Carl lost interest, so they stopped playing and moved to a different part of the room to watch videos. Now it is just Ally and I playing the game, so I ask questions regarding if there are any spirits. I looked at the board, and I see her fingers barely touching the planchette, shaky and hovering over it. I was the same, since I don't want to accidentally move it myself. I felt something in that moment, a force pulling at the planchette. It was different than when my friends moved it. It felt more powerful and heavier. The movement was slow and wobbly. It was moving towards yes. Before it got to yes, I lifted my hands off of it, and so did Ally. I watched the planchette shake in place on the board. No one was touching it. I quickly took the board with the planchette still on it, and placed the board in the box and shut the lid. I'm sitting there holding the lid down, still hearing and feeling the planchette shake in the box. All happening while Carl and John were talking with each other. It stopped shaking, and I look over to John and Carl. They're still watching and bantering over a video. I told them it moved and was shaking and stuff and asked if they saw anything. They said no and didn't take me seriously and sort of laughed it off. They weren't paying attention. I asked Ally and she nodded and said she did. I went home shortly after that, stayed up thinking about it, feeling on edge. I haven't used the Ouija board again, and my friend threw it away. I haven't experienced anything like that since. I don't really think too much about it anymore, except for every once in a while the memory will pop up and I'll wonder about it. I want to know how it worked and what it was that moved it. This experience has my whole family in chills, and we need a rational explanation for it. It happened on last Christmas. My grandparents' house is in middle of the woods. Our whole family has this yearly get-together kind of thing during Christmas. We were preparing dinner, and my aunt was taking a nap. She started screaming, twitching, and woke up in cold sweat. She started mumbling nonsense about seeing visions of mangled toddlers creepily smiling and walking towards her. We thought she went crazy until it was bedtime. My grandfather crawled into his bed to go to sleep when he suddenly started to hear a toddler's voice saying, "Mama, mama." According to him, the voice started to progress and got louder. There are no kids in our house. My grandfather's house is also in middle of nowhere between the woods. That means we do not have neighbors close by either. My cousin, who was scrolling his phone while sitting on the toilet, started to hear this same sound around the same time grandfather heard it. The toilet is at far right of the house and grandfather's room is at far left. So there is no way both of them could have heard voice from different directions at the same time. My mother and myself were sharing a bed that day, and she woke up to the voices of a toddler giggling and saying "Mama." Our dog, an 8-month-old lab, was barking and growling crazily that night. It was so not like him. That furry dude is friendly with anyone and everyone. Same thing happened to my uncle, father, dad, and grandmother, and all of them woke up to the sounds of a supposedly cursed toddler. The weirdest part being them hearing the sound from different parts of the woods. Now I am a terrific sleeper, and I was oblivious to the situation until my cousin yeeted me out of my sleep. We all grabbed a bunch of flashlights and searched all around the area, but found nothing. It resulted in a midnight family meeting with my grandmother claiming that it was her deceased son, who died as a toddler, coming to see her. My uncle claiming it was the work of a thief. My aunt too saying it was her deceased baby brother showing his rage, as we forgot to light a candle on his grave last year. My grandfather saying it was a wild animal, and so on. We almost forgot about this experience until recently when we visited the house and were awakened by footsteps and some kind of soft murmurs. My aunt and uncle were saying they kept on hearing something rolling on the roof for days prior to this experience. I do not believe in your typical ghosts, aka the vengeful, white-robed woman with pale skin and black hair looking for revenge. I hope to get a rational explanation for the experience. Has anyone had any similar experiences? Share your opinions about what it could have been. Although I do not strongly believe in ghosts, as of now, I am willing to learn about their possible existence. Also, I do not think there are any supposedly cursed objects in the house other than a copy of The Crying Boy. A story from my family member next to share. A few years ago, I was living in a house with a bunch of activity. Every night I was woken by knocking and scratching on the wall behind my head, despite that wall not connecting to a neighbor. I put this down to animals, but it spooked me a bit. Then my cat started acting strange around the wardrobe in our bedroom. It was there when we moved in, and she would sit and stare at it for hours, occasionally moving to stick her face down the side of it and meow. We moved the wardrobe, expecting to find a dead mouse or something of that nature, but there was nothing there. Just an old makeshift cane/rod that I'd like to believe was only used in a playful way and not as a genuine punishment for someone. We put the cane back, but after that our toddler started waking up screaming in the night and pointing in terror at the ceiling in her room, saying "man there" over and over. We moved her bed into our room after the third time this happened. One night I was laying in bed about to go to sleep when I heard someone downstairs. I panicked, desperately tapping my partner's arm trying to wake him without alerting the intruder. He wasn't waking up, and eventually I heard someone making their way up the stairs. I grabbed a nearby pair of scissors and waited to be confronted with this stranger, but as they walked into my room, they didn't. I could hear their footsteps continue into my room, but no person was connected to them. I froze in fear and listened to the footsteps stop next to the wardrobe, then they disappeared. We moved out shortly after for unrelated reasons, and over the years the activity seems to have gotten worse. My family constantly hears each other talking or calling out for one another, even though it wasn't us. For example, I heard my daughter clear as day say, "Hey," right behind me the other week, so I said hey back. Of course she was on the other side of the house. My daughter, 5 when this happened, went to get a plate from a low-down kitchen cabinet and told me she heard a man's voice in there saying, "Hello, I see you." I checked for any spaces that could lead to the neighbor's house through there and found nothing. Every night my daughter will now have night terrors. She never remembers them. She's afraid of going into certain rooms alone. Other rooms are fine. She'll regularly hear me calling to her and call back asking what's up. I tell her I never shouted her name, but she's convinced that it's me and I'm just messing with her. Now here's my mistake. I bought a Ouija board into the house after my grandma passed, out of curiosity, as I've never used one before. My daughter wanted to join and asked for a name. The planchette just spelled hi over and over, and when I asked, "Would you like us to go?" it said yes. So we stopped the game, but we forgot to say goodbye. I assumed any weird experience was either my imagination or my grandma coming to check in. So I welcomed it. Every noise or shadow I saw drifting across the hallway, I said out loud, "Hey, Grandma." Well, whatever happened an hour before writing this, it wasn't my grandma. I was having a bad dream. Nothing crazy, but I was walking around a town in the 40s/50s, eating boiled sweets and drinking awful coffee, when a man in a suit brushed up against my back. I took my backpack off to check nothing was wrong with it. The top had been opened, but nothing had been taken or left inside. I felt that was strange, but continued on my day. I visited the cinema and decided to get some food when I saw the same man. Coincidence, but we're in the same town, so it wasn't too strange. Until he bumped into me again, which didn't make sense as he had plenty of space. The room was huge. I took my bag off to inspect it, and this time he hurried off as though he'd put an explosive in my bag. It was open, but again, nothing in there. At this point I told myself to look at the clock. The time was all jumbled, and it reminded me I was dreaming, and I promptly woke up. As soon as I woke up I heard it, someone walking up the stairs. He was humming to himself, the same 3 notes over and over. I kept my eyes shut and tried to nudge my partner to wake him up. Again, he wasn't waking. I heard the man walk into the bedroom, come to my side of the bed. All things I could have written off, but then he moved part of the cover off me. I felt it. I felt the cold air hit my shoulder as the cover came off. I felt the sensation of the cover moving off me. I felt him standing close to me and heard him shifting the weight of his feet between each other. I was completely convinced there was a non-paranormal full-flesh human standing next to me, and that I needed to open my eyes and fight him, or I'm done. So I counted down and sprung open my eyes to be greeted by nothing. I shook my partner awake this time and told him everything. I was sweating and my heart was pounding at this point from the adrenaline of preparing to fight an intruder, and I was struggling to calm myself back down. He went back to sleep, and I sat here thinking back on the similarities between tonight's event and the one years ago in a different house. This one felt much more malicious. The man in my dream terrified me. He was tall and fairly skinny, in a gray suit that didn't seem to fit him properly. He looked a little disheveled and was maybe in his 40s. I got the feeling he used to work for a government agency, but either left or was fired. And he was so calm, but I felt this cruelty about him, just a completely cold person. I have a huge migraine, and there's no way I'm getting back to sleep, so if you made it this far, please let me know your thoughts. Is this just a mixture of old plumbing and my imagination, or is there something else I should consider here? My dreams often end up coming true a few weeks to a few months after I've had them. They're incredibly vivid, and I can figure out I'm in a dream pretty easily to influence whether I wake up or not. This one I just can't figure out. I don't recognize this man at all. Why was I in the 1940s, 50s? What was he trying to put in my bag? The whole thing has left me confused. So it was back in 2020 me and my wife just had our first baby. She was old enough to sleep in her crib alone in her room, with the occasional midnight wake up for a bottle. On this night, I woke up to her crying for her bottle. I got out of bed, went to her room, which was right across from ours. Still half asleep, and it was pitch black in her room. I shit you not. When I made it to her crib, I saw her laying in the middle with her blanket and empty bottle. Again pitch black, but we do this every night. In the corner of her crib, something moved. It caught my eye. In a quick glance in the dark, I could make out a ducking cat. I blinked, and it was gone. I rubbed my eye to try and focus a little better to see what I had thought moved, but the shape was gone now. But I kid you not, I seen a black and white cat. I had told myself sleepless night, and in the dark half asleep, that I was seeing things. Made a joke to my wife that we had a ghost cat. Didn't think anything about it. I'm allergic to cats. We don't have one, nor did we have a stray near our house. Never told any else about this incident. About a year later, my mom came over and was talking to my wife as they walked through the house. We had a big German shepherd inside the house sometimes. As my mom walked through the kitchen, in the corner of her eye, she saw a dark figure laying on the ground. As she was walking through, you can see all the way down the hall, in the few steps that are visible from the kitchen. She said in her mind she saw the figure and was like, oh, it's the dog. But wait, the dog was in the basement cause the baby was out. She described a black and white cat laying in the floor in the hallway, and it getting up and running to the end of the hallway, right where my baby's room was. So yeah, my house has a black and white cat that watches my daughter sleep. Another story from me to share with you. I've had quite a few experiences happen to me. One I've posted before, and pretty much no one believed me. I got called names, mentally ill, or people said I most likely had a seizure. I have never had a seizure. I'm not mentally ill. But the weirdest thing to have ever happened to me was I once came home early from work one day. I started doing the dishes. I was in a good mood since I had a half day at work, so I was so excited to be home early and then make plans with my boyfriend and friends to go out that night. I was energized and excited to get ready to go out. My boyfriend calls me. Last thing I remember was after our conversation was over, I was looking at my phone. Then the weirdest shit happened to me, and I cannot forget this. I remember looking up, and I see a very short lady in my apartment wearing all black. I remember she was ducking down trying to hide behind my bar stools, but I could see her. I remember being completely frozen. I could not physically move at all. Then all of a sudden, it was like I woke up from a trance. Standing still in my kitchen holding my cell phone, not understanding what had just happened or how long I had been standing there for. My cell phone needed to restart. My stove timer was blinking on and off as if the electricity had stopped briefly. I felt extremely tired and exhausted and needed to go immediately lay down. After taking a nap, and woke up and shot up out of bed all of a sudden just remembering I had seen a lady in my kitchen. Except I knew at this point this lady would most likely not be there as I had taken a nap. I looked around my apartment trying to look for signs of a break-in, and I remember feeling so extremely confused, scared and violated that someone was in my apartment. I wanted to call the cops but knew no one would believe me because I had taken a nap. That's what led me to thinking that whoever I saw, or whatever I saw, was probably a ghost or something paranormal. This happened years ago. Just recently, I woke up and found cat food in my hallway on the floor. As if someone just placed cat food on the floor to feed my cats. My cats eat in bowls, not on the floor. I have no idea how that could have possibly happened. It wasn't a hairball or cat vomit either. It was a handful of cat food just in the middle of the floor. I don't sleepwalk either. I'm not sure why, but I've had strange things happen throughout my life. A few years ago, I woke up one morning with my abuser who began a fight with me because I politely told him I was having a bad mental health and please be nice to me that day. He threw some furniture around and screamed at me at the top of my lungs, degrading me and calling me names and slurs. I fully lost hope at that moment and gave up. It was the final straw, and I felt like I'd never be free of the abuse. He dragged me to an amusement/theme park that day, and I miserably walked around with him all day. At one point we sat down to eat some food. The only empty seat was at the same table as this married couple. We very briefly chatted about the food and the park. We then got up and kept walking around. A few hours later, the woman from this married couple we ate with flagged me down and waved me over. She said, "I don't know if you're spiritual or not, and I don't mean to alarm you, but I've been noticing something attached to you all day. Something bad. It's been following you." She looked directly into my eyes as she said this, and asked me if I would mind if she said a prayer for me right then and there. I agreed. She said the prayer. Unfortunately, my abuser didn't realize she was talking directly to me, and he kind of hogged the whole conversation, and told her that he's been having such a hard time lately, and really needed help while crying. Little did she know he was sexually abusing me at the time, and attempted to do so that very morning. I was hoping for a moment of privacy with this woman to tell her what's going on so maybe she could help me. A few years later, I'm still stuck here, and the abuse has gotten worse. A few nights ago, I randomly woke up in the middle of the night and felt fully awake and not groggy at all. Then I heard a male voice whisper, "Hello," very clearly. My abuser stirred in his sleep and stopped snoring, and our dog woke up too and made a curious sound. I very clearly felt eyes on me, but I was so scared to actually see anything that I shut my eyes and laid there fully awake until I fell back asleep again. I have also been having a major increase in sleep paralysis lately, but it feels so different than other times. It feels so much more evil. I will dream that I am awake in bed, and either a male or female demonic entity with the most horrific demented appearance comes to me and begins mutilating me, raping me, or tickling my armpits, which is a very painful sensation for me. My usual methods for waking from sleep paralysis don't work during this, and I have no choice but to lay there helpless being killed or raped in the most vivid dream imaginable. Does anyone have any guidance? I've heard that demons attach themselves to you in your weakest moments, and I've been having many such moments in this awful shitty relationship. I know that it's mostly my abuser's doing, but I can't help but feel like something purely evil has attached itself to me to torture me further. I feel depressed and anxious 24/7 like a gigantic cloud of malaise, just trailing me everywhere. I feel enveloped in darkness. I've been a high school teacher for 10 years, and I still think of this one time. One of my special education students made several comments about angels. Personally, I've never been much of a believer, but the paranormal stuff really interests me. Never seen, heard, or experienced anything paranormal. Some scary stories, videos, and such do freak me out, but it never goes beyond that. I'm a skeptic in many things. I believe in science and reason, but also believe there's something else beyond ourselves. This former student of mine has autism, plus other diagnosed medical conditions. She graduated years ago, by the way. One time during class, after finishing my lecture, she started crying uncontrollably. I went up to her to ask if she was okay, and to assist her in whatever she needed. The aide that was with her escorted her out of the room in case she needed some alone time. Outside of the classroom, we asked her what was wrong and refused to tell us as she wiped her tears. Eventually she calmed down and went back to class. After a few minutes, assuming once she felt comfortable to talk, she told the aide that she was seeing angels around the room. She said it loud enough that the whole class heard her. Everyone went completely silent, that you could hear a needle drop on the floor. We didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable or that she felt that she was the center of attention, so we asked her if she wanted to talk about it outside again. She said no, repeated again, loud enough, that she was seeing angels around the classroom. This time she was calm but with watery eyes. All we could do was acknowledge her and say, "That's beautiful. I'm sure they're here to protect us." She smiled, said yes, and went back to the assignment. I made my report to the diagnostician in charge of our special students. During one of our SPED meetings, grandmother, student, counselor, myself, diagnostician, and an assistant principal were all present. Everything was going fine, until she started crying again in front of all of us. This time, she put down her head and we asked if she was okay, if she needed anything, and if something was said that upset her. She said no, crying, put her head up with eyes looking down and said, "There's an angel behind my teacher." I froze as everyone looked at me. I was speechless in that moment. I didn't feel fear, I felt some sort of peace. An inner peace I had never felt before. All I could think of was of my grandma who had passed away a few weeks before. First death in the family I had experienced. I didn't know what to say. As a way to acknowledge her, the grandmother asked her what she was seeing, and she said there was a very bright light behind me. She said it had no shape, just a bright light. Grandma asked her if she had seen the angels before, and she said yes, everywhere she goes, that they usually move around the rooms and stay behind people. The diagnostician asked why she was crying. If she was scared, she said no. She said they looked very pretty and made her happy. I asked if that was what she saw the other day in my classroom, and she said yes, that some kids had them on them and some didn't. That the lights would follow kids and stay around them while some kids had none. Until this day, it has been one of the strangest things that have happened to me as an educator. What she said in that meeting still gives me a sense of peace, as well as sadness for what she said that some kids don't have angels behind them. This happened 6 years ago, and I only talked about it once, but since so many years have passed I feel somewhat comfortable at least talking/typing about it now. I'm typing this on my phone, so I apologize for the weird formatting. Also TW for animal death. To give some context and background, I'm native and I live on a reservation. In mid-2018 my grandfather got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, after finally calling us on the third day of him not being able to eat or drink anything. He didn't like doctors or hospitals. Once he was hospitalized, he asked us to move into his house so we could take care of it, also so we could take care of him once he got back from treatment for small visits. I should also state that my grandfather/his wife passed in 2015 due to lung cancer. My grandparents own a large piece of land, since they used to have a farm when my mom was younger. Weird things have happened over the years. My mom and her siblings saw some weird-ass shit around the property. Youngest sibling saw a naked man crawling on the road during a thunderstorm, and they disappeared. My mom and her eldest saw a humanoid wolf pushing a baby stroller. There's a stroller in the woods still. Moving on now that I elaborated a bit. It's been a few months since we moved into our grandparents' house. Ever since our grandfather got hospitalized, we were pretty settled in at this point. So, my mom brought home KFC because she didn't feel like cooking that night, and she invited our cousin over to join us. After we finished eating, I went out onto the deck. This is where I saw something black on the ground, and I thought it was shoe or piece of clothing at first. So, obviously I walked down the ramp to get a better look at what it was, and it was a severed dog head. I got worried and obviously went back inside to tell my mom. At first she was like, "There's a bear in the area, poor puppy." But I was like, "No, this is a severed dog head." My oldest sibling went out to check, while me, my mom, and our cousin stood on the deck, and my older sibling confirmed that it was a dog's head. It was a medium-sized dog that had black fur. My sibling looked at it a bit more and commented that the cut looks too clean to have been a bear. A bear would have obliterated it. At this point the wind started to pick up, and my mom obviously got nauseous and went back inside. So we're all on edge, and my cousin calls her mom, who's a medicine woman, and she comes dressed in full medicine man attire and has all her shit with her. She starts to bless us, before moving on to blessing the inside of the house. I should add that the house is 2 stories, so there's like 4 steps to get into the dining/kitchen area, followed by steps that lead to the basement on the right side. So picture a small closed entryway with another door at the top. So me, my 3 siblings, and our mom is standing in that entryway to let her do her thing. While she's moving into the living room, something fucking runs towards the hallway towards the bedrooms. There's a wind chime that decorates the hallway. So we knew what direction that fucker went. Honestly, I was scared shitless at this point, and my younger siblings were on the verge of crying. Our cousin's mom finishes blessing the inside of the house, and she moves on to blessing around the house and property line. She got rid of the dog head and told us to sleep in the living room that night and to cover all the windows so nothing could see inside. She also told us not to mention or acknowledge what happened, because whatever put that severed dog head there obviously wanted attention, and it got it. So, we slept in the living room. I couldn't sleep at all and just watched movies all night. In the morning we moved our beds back to our rooms, though my mom was hesitant obviously, and we never talked about it after that. I also forgot to mention that the dog's head was pointed towards our eldest sibling's window/bed. They slept in the basement, so whatever the fuck it was didn't like them and deliberately put it there. Our oldest sibling attracts the weirdest shit, and none of us know why TBH. Out of my 3 siblings, I'm the only one who physically sees stuff/hears. There's so much weird shit I've seen growing up, and most of it was connected to our dad. Fuck that guy. They do as well, but it's every once in a blue moon. Here's a small list of stuff to end this post off. Multiple dark, shadowy figures and animals or animal-looking creatures, full-body apparitions or people. Something like to scratch at the walls during the night when our dad yelled at us. He was physically and mentally abusive. It was almost always where his bed was voices, like muffled conversation, but nothing could ever be made out, always a man and woman's voice. The thing that mimicked our dad, a skinless man, an owl man, he was an omen. Basically, he appeared 2 years after our grandmother found out she had lung cancer, but she kept it to herself and never told anyone until she was hospitalized. Guy who was dressed in a white suit with a white hat, but his face was always obscured by the doorframe because he was taller than it. Only knew that fucker had a hat because he bent down to look at me fucking skinwalker. Type thing that my dad brought to the house from his parents' house. He lived in the hills, and there's weird ass shit up there, bear-looking thing that stood upright, little people, weird auras/lights around objects. Last night, I had a dream so strange, scary, and mostly disturbing that it's still lingering in my mind. It wasn't just an ordinary dream. It was one of those that leave a strong feeling behind, even after waking up. What made it different was the moment I somehow realized I was dreaming. Normally, this realization would excite me, but this time, instead of simply enjoying the experience, I felt an overwhelming urge to tell everyone around me that I knew it was a dream. As soon as I spoke those words, something changed. The atmosphere shifted in an unsettling way, and suddenly, eerie images started appearing around me. They were outright terrifying, but significantly their randomness and the way they emerged made them deeply disturbing. It was as if the dream itself didn't want me to be aware that it was a dream, and by acknowledging it, I had triggered something sinister. One image that truly haunted me was of a figure with a head shaped like a clock. At first, it seemed like a strange and harmless concept, but in that dreamlike state, it was incredibly unsettling. The ticking sound coming from its head grew louder and more intense, blending with an overwhelming sense of dread. It wasn't just the sight of the figure that disturbed me. It was the feeling it carried, an unexplainable heaviness that filled the entire space. No matter where I turned, the dream seemed to react to my awareness, warping itself into something darker. The people around me, who had seemed normal before, started behaving oddly, some staring blankly, others whispering things I couldn't quite understand. It felt as if I had broken some unspoken rule of the dream world, and now I was facing the consequences. The air itself felt thicker, making it harder to move, as if the dream was trying to trap me inside, so I can see all this creepy scenes and look at the guy with his head shaped like a clock that is ticking non-stop. Then, just as the eerie feeling reached its peak, I woke up. But even after opening my eyes, the strangeness hadn't fully left me. Without realizing it, I found out that I was pulling the skin under my eyes to wake myself up, almost as if I was trying to shake off whatever had lingered from the dream while I was already sleeping. It was such an unnatural reaction that a sleeping person can do without conscious, something I'd never done before, which made the whole experience even more unsettling. Even now, hours later, I can't shake the feeling that something in that dream was trying to reach me. The clock-headed figure, the eerie whispers, the thick air, it all felt deliberate, as if the dream wanted to show me something I wasn't ready to understand. Something about that dream was different. I've had strange dreams before, but this one carried a weight, a sense that it wasn't just meaningless fragments of my imagination. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, a collection of subconscious fears manifesting in strange ways. Or maybe, just maybe, dreams aren't always as random as we think. Okay, so I moved into this house about 3 years ago now, and I still live with my family. For some backstory, this land was always empty, even though the suburb was filled with homes, and there was no more land. It was never listed for sale, but when my parents inquired, they said it was heritage listed. On this block of land there was an old, very rundown shed that looked like it had been there for years, and an old-style home that too looked run down. No one was living in it, but they could not knock it down at the time. By some miracle they ended up selling the land to my parents, and we were able to build. Unlike our last family home, this home did not feel at all unsettling, haunted, or even as though there was any presence. But of course, at the back of my mind there was always that feeling regarding the abandoned land, and that the house stood there for years and used. Throughout our time living here, although, my family and I have seen people. Just the shadow of them. For me it was when I was asleep on the couch upstairs. We have a TV unit facing the couch, and a little cutout in the wall where the stairs is. I was woken up from my nap for some reason, and my eyes darted to a reflection in the TV, of a woman standing where the stairs would be, through the cutout. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it, and it obviously woke me up fully. I stared what felt like forever because it wasn't moving or talking, but then I saw it turn around and walk down the stairs. At the time I thought it may be my mom, but she wasn't home. My grandmother, who also lives with us, had a similar experience. She woke up in the middle of the night to what looked like my mom, as clear as day. She was just thinking it was my mom checking in on her, which isn't necessarily unusual as my grandma is 92. She spoke to her, and she wasn't replying, so she reached out to grab her, and the face and body shifted into something completely unrecognizable, and then walked out the room. My mom also sees shadows in the night, and at the same time hears my siblings, who have moved out, screaming saying "Mum," jerking her to look up and then see the shadow. My boyfriend slept over the other night and had to sleep on the couch, joys of still living with my traditional parents. And about 10 minutes after I left him when I said goodnight, he sent me a text saying, "Was that you? Stop, I'm trying to sleep." I was in my bed scrolling my phone. He told me something was staring, he could feel it, but it was just a shadow of a woman. He called out to it saying my name thinking it was me, and it didn't move. It ended up turning around and walking away in the direction of my room, he said. Each time, it doesn't feel unsettling. Of course the experience my grandma had was scarier, and there is still unease surrounding these experiences. But why is it always when we are trying to sleep? It's so crazy.